Today we're in Brussels, capital of Belgium and heart of Europe. We won't bother you with chocolate, waffles and beers. We're here to understand the soul of the city. We start the day in a cozy cafe full of books, and then we head to the center, where there are main landmarks. Next to the cafe is a Gothic cathedral.
And a visit of Brussels has to start from
the Grand Place, the historical center of Brussels.
It's a World Heritage Site and is surrounded by opulent guild halls, testament of the ability of local merchants and tradesmen of the centuries. It's kind of interesting how the locals are attached to all these wine statues.
It's quite interesting to notice that one of the main attractions within Brussels is actually the statue of this small child that is doing a wee-wee. Also quite funny the fact that every now and then they just change the outfit. But you know, on top of like this little boy doing a wee-wee, there's something else. There's also the girl and the dog as well.
But once you pass the Grand Place, Brussels, it's completely different. The city centre is quite decadent and quirky. There's something bruised behind the surface. And as we walk, we discover a subtle sense of humour embedded in the street art galleries and statues. Brussels walls are covered with street arts, in particular with murals of famous comics. This is because Brussels is home of some of the most famous comics, Tintin, the Smurfs, Lucky Luke, just to name some of them, and has its own comic strip museum, which is actually really interesting. Our first impression of the city is now changing. All these art, all the cafes, all these kind of like co-working spaces are definitely not for tourists, they're for locals, and you can see how the city is really lived by the people that are there. Luckily, we have a friend in Brussels, Filippo. We asked him about what it is like living in Brussels.
I got to Brussels in 2004, but since the beginning I found it to be a very easy city, full of opportunities, full of art, a lot of opportunities to see concerts, exhibitions, very rich. And also over the last few years the city became much better. There are much more places where you can go out in terms of restaurants and bars. They built a lot of new cycle paths. There is the biggest pedestrian, or one of the biggest pedestrian city centers in Europe. Way more restaurants and bars than when I arrived here, so it's an extremely livable city. And on top of everything else, if you take into consideration the relatively small dimension of the city and the number of nationalities represented, Brussels is the most international city in Europe, which, you know, gives it an extra kick and an extra layer of interest.
Brussels is also the de facto capital of the European Union. Behind me is the headquarters of the European Commission.
And Brussels is also home of the European Union and many of its institutions. They represent the ideal of united Europe that ensures peace, freedom and prosperity. It's time now to head to one of the most important museums, the one of René Magritte, the Belgian painter famous for his surrealism. His paintings often represent ordinary objects in unusual context. He influenced pop art, minimalism art and conceptual art in the 20th century. It's dark now, so it's time for a glass of wine. Fermento is a new local Italian wine bar opened by Filippo and his friends. It was excellent. Then a taste of some Belgian food, some mussels, before a final beer in the garden of a royal palace, where DJ is playing music. We have a better understanding of Brussels now. Don't get fooled if it does not have the landmarks of Paris or Madrid. It's a super interesting city if you dig underneath the surface. We think of Brussels as someone in his or her 20s, a bit poor and decadent on the outside, but full of energy and creativity and sense of humor on the inside.